Some loves begin with loud vows, but there are also loves that speak only in whispers, steadfast and more faithful than any promise could be. Camille once believed her heart had been sealed shut by old wounds, while Grayson carried the weight of mistakes and abandonments from his past. They found each other again in the vast desert, not to start over, but to learn how to stay, and in the simplest of moments, amid children's laughter and quiet mornings, they must decide, is love powerful enough to outlast temptation, doubt, and the fears that live deep within their hearts? Camille Torres had never been the kind of woman who believed in fated encounters. She believed in full calendars, in meticulously crafted brand strategies, in the cold blue glow of her laptop casting light on her face every night. At 32, she had secured an enviable position at a brand consulting firm in Los Angeles, her client list stretching from fledgling tech startups to time-honored consumer giants. From the outside, it looked like she had everything: a rising career, a small but cozy apartment in West Hollywood, and a confidence that could silence anyone in a boardroom. But only Camille knew the emptiness behind the closed door at night. It wasn't that she lacked friends, nor that men didn't pursue her. She had learned after too many fleeting connections that loneliness was easier than lying beside someone who left her heart hollow. Late at night, while the city outside roared on, she often sat by her window overlooking Santa Monica Boulevard, wondering if anyone out there carried the same quiet ache she did. Her trip to Joshua Tree wasn't, at least on paper, meant to fill that void. A health-focused startup had invited her to join a week-long retreat. They wanted Camille to help shape their brand before a round of fundraising. The location, Ridgefire Preserve, a newly opened sanctuary nestled among desert rock formations and towering Joshua trees, their silhouettes strange against the sky. Camille had almost refused. She wasn't drawn to retreats, promising self-discovery, but the professional opportunity was too tempting. So she packed her suitcase, brought her laptop, and drove 3 hours east into the desert. From the moment she stepped into Ridgefire Preserve, Camille sensed it was more than just a getaway. The place was raw, a blend of modern wood architecture and the desert's untamed wildness. Evening light drenched the boulders in gold, while the wind carried the pungent scent of sage and creosote. But trouble appeared as she rolled her suitcase into her assigned cabin, a burst water pipe. Repairs would take the day, and the manager, flustered with apologies, finally announced that Camille would have to share a cabin with another guest. Camille frowned. Sharing a room had never been part of the deal. Still, in the middle of the desert, she had no choice. "Who is it?" she asked, irritation edged with curiosity. "Grayson Veil," the manager replied carefully, as if the name carried a story. Camille wasn't sure how to react. When she pushed open the door, she first saw a tall figure framed against the window, broad shoulders cloaked in shadow. He turned, and Camille froze for half a breath, a square jaw dusted with unshaven stubble, steel grey eyes rimmed with amber, an intricate tattoo curling along his forearm like a map of an untold tale. "You must be Camille," he said, his voice low and rough, neither welcoming nor cold. "That's right. Looks like we're sharing for the night," Camille answered, keeping her tone steady, though she braced herself for discomfort. "Not my choice," Grayson shrugged. "But the other cabin's underwater." She set her suitcase down, taking in the Spartan room: wooden beds, a short dresser, and a small table by the fireplace. The air was taut, like a violin string stretched too tight. The first hours dragged. Camille buried herself in her laptop, typing furiously as though he weren't there. Grayson pulled out a notebook and pencil, sketching in silence. Only the desert wind and the scratch of graphite filled the space. Night fell. The desert sky deepened to black. A sudden crash shook the cabin, and the lights blinked out. Darkness. Camille shot up, exasperated. "Unbelievable. Happens all the time out here," Grayson said, rummaging until he found a lantern. A warm amber glow soon softened the shadows, illuminating his face. His eyes, in that light, looked like storms held in check. Camille reluctantly sat across from him at the wooden table with no laptop or internet. He poured whiskey into 2 glasses and slid one toward her. "Helps take the edge off." She hesitated, then accepted. The liquor burned her throat but eased the tension between them. At first, their talk was polite and perfunctory. "What do you do? Why are you here?" But as the wind outside grew fiercer, so did their confessions. Camille spoke of the relentless pressure in her industry, of always having to be strong, never allowed to falter. After a long silence, Grayson admitted he'd once co-founded a tech empire in San Francisco. He'd had it all until betrayal shattered his company, divorce gutted his marriage, and he abandoned it all for desert quiet. "Don't you miss it?" Camille asked, eyes sharp with curiosity, maybe even challenge. The view from the top, then watching it all collapse. Grayson studied his glass. "I remember, and I don't. Because the truth is, I never really belonged there." His words left her quiet. Lightning flashed beyond the window. For the first time in years, Camille felt herself lowering her guard. Silence settled, no longer heavy but intimate. Shadows lengthened, the lantern's glow painting their figures on the wall. When Camille met his gaze, tired yet intent, storm grey rimmed with fire, she knew the line between them had blurred. The whiskey didn't intoxicate so much as dissolve the invisible walls they had carried in with them. Outside, the wind battered the cabin, and rain pattered hard on the roof. Inside, warmth, light, and breath wove a fragile harmony. "You said you didn't belong there," Camille murmured, swirling the amber liquid in her glass. "So where do you belong?" Grayson leaned back, eyes tracing the wooden ceiling. "I don't know. I thought I belonged in glass-walled offices and midnight financial reports for years. But when the dust cleared, all I had left was a business card with a name I barely believed in." Camille's lips curved wryly. "At least you got to touch the summit. Me? I only know how to keep climbing. Because if I stop, nothing is waiting, just an empty apartment and a cold bed." His eyes caught hers, sharp and unyielding. "Maybe we both chose loneliness, even when we didn't want to." The words pierced deeper than she expected. She swallowed another sip to hide the lump in her throat. "And now? Have you found anything here?" A smile flickered across his lips, half bitter, half tender. "Trees, stones, mornings without alarms, nights like this." His gaze lingered, landing on her. Her heartbeat stumbled. For once, she wanted to believe she was more than a passing guest in his story. Thunder tore across the sky, lightning illuminating the room for a heartbeat. When it faded, she found him still watching her. "What are you looking at?" she whispered. "The only person here brave enough to tell me the truth." She laughed softly, but her eyes shone. The air seemed to melt into something fragile, waiting. No one moved with intent, no one played a game. But when Grayson leaned closer, Camille mirrored him, their lips brushed tentative, testing if this was a mistake. A second later, the kiss deepened, searing yet gentle. Clothes slipped away in the storm's howls, but inside, there was no haste, no script, only two weary souls finding shelter in each other. Camille allowed herself to be seen in her most fragile state for the first time, and that night, held in Grayson's arms as though she were all that remained in the world, she stopped running. They drifted into sleep to the rhythm of rain against the roof, their shared warmth banishing the desert's cold. When Camille woke, dawn light spilled through the window. The cabin smelled faintly of damp wood and lingering whiskey. She reached for the space beside her, only to find it empty. Grayson was gone. Her heart thudded. The silence pressed heavily, broken only by a lone desert bird's call. On the edge of the bed lay her robe, neatly folded. Atop it a note. Camille picked it up. One short line in sharp handwriting. "Thank you for not asking me to stay." Nothing else. No number, no address, no promise. Her chest tightened. Part of her felt relief, no strings, no entanglement, but another part ached, as if mourning something she'd barely begun to hold. Stepping outside, she met the desert morning. Golden light across endless sands, sage carried on the breeze. The world looked unchanged, untouched. But Camille knew otherwise. On one stormy night, her life had quietly shifted course. She dropped her suitcase on the floor in Los Angeles, flipped open her laptop, and slipped seamlessly into meetings, contracts, and deadlines. On the surface, nothing had changed. Yet in the drawer of her nightstand, a folded note lay hidden, a secret, a memory, a scar. Camille didn't know it yet, but that night would be the beginning of everything, of pain, of trial, and of a love she had never believed herself worthy of. Camille couldn't remember what she felt. The first time, 2 red lines appeared on the test strip. She only knew she stood frozen in the bathroom for several minutes, listening to the traffic outside Santa Monica Boulevard, blending with the frantic rhythm of her heartbeat. She didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't laugh. Only an unfamiliar emptiness opened up inside her, not loneliness this time, but a doorway into something at once terrifying and sacred. The first person Camille thought of course, was Grayson. The memory of him on that stormy night in Joshua Tree, his eyes holding an entire universe unsolved, his hands cradling her with a tenderness she had never known, flashed before her. But just as quickly, that image dissolved, replaced by the note he had left behind. "Thank you for not asking me to stay." He had chosen to disappear. And Camille knew she couldn't depend on someone who had left before sunrise. So she drew a long breath and stared into the mirror. Reflected was a woman with slightly tousled hair, tired eyes lit with fierce resolve. "I can do this," she whispered, almost like a vow. The next day, instead of seeking out one of those glossy Beverly Hills clinics her clients often boasted about, Camille chose a small practice in Echo Park, run by a renowned midwife named Sadara Johnson. 70 years old, African-American, she had delivered hundreds of babies in her community. Her office walls were covered with photos of round-cheeked infants, beneath a wooden sign carved with the words, "Where life begins, love never ends." Sadara studied Camille with an expression that was both stern and kind. "You'll do this on your own?" Camille nodded. "I won't run from it. I can handle it." The midwife smiled softly and poured her a cup of ginger tea. "A mother is never truly alone. A community will always be behind you if you let them." Camille stayed silent. Deep down, she knew Sadara was right, but independence had become her armor, and she wasn't ready to put it down. In the weeks that followed, Camille began to plan. She recalibrated her budget, cut back on luxuries, and took on extra contracts. Long nights with her laptop were no longer about proving herself. They were about building a future for the small life growing within her. Her West Hollywood apartment began to shift, too. Once stacked with design books and ad mock-ups, the corner became an open space for a minimalist white crib. Camille hung a few small frames on the wall, not expensive artwork, but sketches she had drawn herself. A sky full of stars, a lone Joshua tree, 2 hands clasped together. While organizing her drawers one evening, Camille found Grayson's note again. She held it for a long time, then sat at the edge of her bed. "You didn't stay," she whispered, "but I will." She placed it into a small wooden box, alongside keepsakes she would one day give her child, a silver bracelet from her mother, a family photo from when she was 5. She knew sleepless nights and uncertain days lay ahead. But for the first time in years, Camille felt herself moving forward instead of standing still. Her pregnancy was no glossy magazine spread. It was morning sickness so harsh that she pulled over on Sunset Boulevard to retch. It was nights curled on her bed, hands wrapped around her belly, whispering to someone not yet born, "I'm here. You're not alone." Sadara became her anchor. At every checkup, the midwife listened patiently not only to Camille's body, but to her hidden fears. "I'm scared I won't be good enough," Camille confessed once. "No mother is good enough in every way," Sadara replied, resting her hand gently on Camille's belly. "But the love you give will always be enough." Work still consumed her, but now every contract she signed wasn't just for her ambition, it was for her baby's future. Colleagues sometimes marveled at her calmness, unaware that each night at home she whispered stories to her unborn child, painting pictures of the world outside, her dreams, and old lullabies her mother once sang. At 8 months, Camille sat on her balcony, hand on her round belly, watching Los Angeles shimmer with lights. A breeze carried the faint scent of jasmine from a neighbor's window. Closing her eyes, she imagined her baby's face. And just for a heartbeat, Grayson's storm-gray eyes, edged with amber, surfaced in her mind. Her chest tightened, not in pain, but in recognition that his memory had left her this gift. Labor came suddenly, with a rare Los Angeles rain. Camille called Sadara, and her apartment transformed into a quiet, sacred space within an hour. Candles flickered, and warm water was prepared. Camille doubled over, sweat soaking her forehead, fists clenched in the blanket. Each contraction split her apart, but she grit her teeth and whispered, "We can do this, baby." Sidara's weathered hands steadied her shoulders, her voice a steady rhythm. "Inhale, exhale. You are not alone." After hours of struggle, a piercing cry filled the room, breaking the silence wide open. Camille collapsed, tears mixing with sweat, as Sidara placed a tiny, warm body on her chest. She looked down, eyes are tightly shut, and tiny fingers are clutching her skin. The world fell still. In that moment, Camille knew every loss had led her here. "Hello," she whispered, trembling. "My son." When the baby opened his eyes for the first time, Camille caught her breath. Steel gray, rimmed with gold, just like the man from that stormy night in Joshua Tree. Her heart clenched and expanded all at once. "What will you name him?" Sidara asked. Camille swallowed hard, then whispered, "Solis Elijah Torres." "Sunlight," Sidara smiled. A name filled with light. While the city outside blazed on that night, Camille lay in her small apartment, cradling Solis against her chest. She listened to his fragile breaths, felt the heat of his tiny body. The noise of the world faded away. Only the two were them, a universe where love began with a single breath. The days that followed were chaos and wonder. Solis cried in the night, fragile and demanding, but every time his tiny hand brushed her cheek, Camille felt stronger than ever. There were moments she broke, collapsing to the floor in exhaustion, eyes blurred from sleepless nights. But when Solis let out a sleepy giggle, Camille laughed too, reminding herself, "It's worth it. All of it is worth it." One late night, Camille wrote in her journal, "I used to think love was loud, something proven by having someone stand beside you. But the greatest love I've known is holding a small life in my arms and realizing I would do anything to keep him safe. Solis, you are the reason I know I have never truly been alone." West Hollywood was always noisy, but life carried a different rhythm inside Camille Torres's small apartment. No more leisurely mornings with lattes at the hipster cafe downstairs. No more late nights sketching brand campaigns until dawn. These days, Camille's schedule pulsed with Solis's rhythm, his cries, laughter, feedings, and sleep. The first day she brought Solis home, Camille laughed through tears as she looked around her once familiar apartment and realized it was no longer just hers. Once purely decorative, the cream-colored throw pillow on the sofa was stained with spit-up. The dining table had turned into a cluttered station of bottles, wipes, and parenting books hastily ordered from Amazon. On the walls, her sketches had been replaced by ultrasound photos, pictures of Solis asleep, and sticky notes that read, "Boil water, change diapers, buy more rash cream." Work continued, though differently. Her laptop now lived on the kitchen counter, where she could edit brand strategies while glancing at Solis in his crib. More than once, during video calls with clients, Solis's sudden wails forced her to smile apologetically, mute herself, and scoop him up. Most clients understood, even softened. "You remind me of when my kids were small," one told her. "Go ahead, hold him, we'll wait." But of course, it wasn't always smooth. Some contracts slipped away because she couldn't meet the deadlines. Some nights she typed with one hand while rocking Solis with the other, her eyes burning from exhaustion. And on certain mornings, scrolling past her friends' Instagram posts of cocktail parties and Bali getaways, a sharp pang twisted inside her. One night at 2 a.m., Solis cried endlessly. Camille tried everything, fresh diapers, feeding, lullabies, yet his sobs grew. Finally, she sank to the floor, cradling him against her chest, and began to cry too. "Mama's tired too, sweetheart, but I won't give up." Strangely, as though he heard her promise, Solis's wails softened into hiccups, then quiet. Camille kissed his silky hair, tears still on her cheeks. Money was another weight. Rent, medical bills, baby supplies, it piled quickly. But Camille, disciplined as ever, adjusted. She traded fancy dinners for home-cooked meals and picked up small projects during Solis's naps. Each time she saw him sleeping peacefully, his innocent face radiant with trust. Strength surged back into her veins. Even at her most drained, Camille never let fatigue drown her love. She spent hours reading picture books to him, though he only cooed and smiled without understanding. She took him to the nearby park, letting the sun warm his tiny cheeks. She documented every milestone, his first smile, roll, and babbled sounds as if archiving treasures. Sometimes, a quiet ache pierced Camille when Solis looked up at her with those grey eyes rimmed in gold. They weren't only her son's eyes. They belonged to Grayson, too, the man who had left like a storm, leaving a void she still refused to call longing. But even then, she reminded herself, he's gone. It's just us two, and that's enough. Time passed faster than Camille expected. The sleepless nights gave way to small joys. Solis crawling, then wobbling to his feet, leaving smudged handprints across walls and scattering toys like constellations of color on the floor. To others, it was clutter. To Camille, it was a love map her son was drawing across their home. One Sunday morning, Camille took Solis to Echo Park. He wore a striped blue and white outfit, clutching his rubber duck. When he saw the real ducks gliding across the lake, he squealed with delight, pointing and babbling in a half-song. Camille sat on a bench, camera in hand, capturing the moment. That photo later became her phone's wallpaper, a daily reminder that joy was sometimes nothing more than sunlight caught in her child's smile. By the time Solis turned 2, Camille had built a new rhythm. Morning yoga at home, coffee brewing, breakfast made, dropping him off at the community playgroup, then diving into work. Evenings were reserved for bedtime stories and early lights out for both of them. She wasn't running herself into the ground anymore. She learned to say no to draining projects, choosing clients who valued her time instead. Friends noticed the change. Camille was no longer the woman consumed by deadlines. She was calmer now, steadier, her eyes carrying a quiet peace. Someone teased, "You've aged, Camille." She only smiled, knowing it wasn't age, it was growth, in a different direction. Of course, hard days still came. Nights when Solis burned with fever and Camille sat awake, trembling prayers slipping from her lips. Days when he refused food, flinging porridge onto the floor. Camille would sigh, then laugh at his mischievous eyes. "All right, you win today. But tomorrow, Mama takes her turn." Some moments sliced her heart unexpectedly. One afternoon, Solis pointed at a man walking past the window and babbled. "Dada." Camille froze, hiding the sting in her chest. She had never told him about Grayson. In her mind, she rehearsed the words she would one day say, that his father was part of another story, far away. She only held him close for now and whispered, "You have Mama, always." Sometimes, in her dreams, Camille still found herself back in Joshua Tree, the storm, the heat of his gaze, the warmth of his touch. Each time she woke, she told herself it was only a memory, nothing more. But the memory, no matter how she tried to bury it, lived on in Solis's eyes. One quiet evening, after putting Solis to bed, Camille sat at her laptop searching for design inspiration. She scrolled through images of desert retreats, ideas for a client's campaign. Without thinking, her fingers clicked on a familiar name, Ridgefire Retreats. The homepage bloomed with images, star-strewn skies, towering Joshua trees, rustic wooden cabins. Camille inhaled sharply, a tug in her chest both familiar and painful. She scrolled down to the Our Team section, and there, staring back at her from the screen, was a face she could never mistake. Steel-grey eyes rimmed with amber, that half-hidden, half-revealing smile. Grayson Veil, founder and director. Camille's heart clenched. She lifted her hand to the screen, as though warmth could cross the glass. Memories surged the note on the bed, the rain pounding the roof, the eyes she now saw daily in her son's face. She closed the laptop and sat in darkness, the question pounding like a knock at her door. Could it be that my son might need a father? It took Camille many nights to decide. Ever since she had seen Grayson's face on the Ridgefire website, her heart had been beating in two tempos, one half urging her to let it go, to pretend she hadn't seen anything, to keep safe the steady life she had built for herself and her son. the other half pulling her back, like an invisible thread, to the desert where it had all begun. Solis was 4 now, a bright boy with boundless imagination. One evening, as Camille wrestled with her thoughts, Solis ran up with a drawing. 3 figures stood side by side, a woman with long hair, a round-eyed child, and a tall man. Beneath it, in shaky letters, he had written, "Family." "Who's this?" Camille asked softly, her voice trembling. Solis grinned, innocent. "You, me, and the one I don't know yet. But I think he's real." Camille pulled him into her arms, her eyes blurring. He had never met his father, but somehow, deep in his child's heart, Solis knew a piece was missing. That night, Camille opened Ridgefire's website again. She read every line, every client testimonial. Ridgefire is not just a retreat, it's where you learn to breathe again. And everywhere, the name of Grayson Veil woven into its soul. The next morning, Camille packed. She told Solis they were taking a short trip to the desert. He cheered, thinking it nothing more than a weekend adventure. As the car left Los Angeles behind, the city's noise fading in the rearview mirror, Camille's chest tightened. The desert unfolded silent Joshua trees, standing like guardians, sunlight spilling across golden earth. Then, the wooden sign appeared, "Ridgefire Retreats." Camille stopped the car, inhaling deeply. Solis squealed from the back seat. "Mama, it's so beautiful. We're really staying here." She nodded, though inside her heart was a storm. The retreat was serene cabins scattered along stone paths, the main lodge rising in warm redwood. Camille held Solis's hand as they entered the reception. A young woman greeted them brightly. "Welcome to Ridgefire. How long will you be staying?" Before Camille could answer, a voice came from behind. Low, familiar, and it froze her blood. "Welcome to Ridgefire. I'm Grayson, founder here." Camille turned, and there he was. After all these years, those storm-grey eyes rimmed in gold, his face carved deeper by time. He wore a sand-colored linen shirt, a notebook in hand, their eyes locked, time folded in on itself, back to that stormy night. Grayson hesitated. His gaze shifted professional courtesy, melting into shock, then recognition. Camille. The air grew unbearably still. Solis squeezed his mother's hand, curious about the stranger. Camille swallowed hard, forcing composure. "We're just here for a few days." Grayson nodded slowly, but his eyes never left hers. "Of course, I'll arrange a cabin for you both." That night, in their cabin overlooking the desert, Camille sat motionless on the bed while Solis doodled stars on paper. She knew this was only the beginning. Tomorrow, she would have to face the truth and the man who had walked away at dawn. The next morning, Camille woke early. Desert sunlight poured through the curtains golden, gentler than the neon of Los Angeles. She stepped onto the porch with a cup of coffee. In the distance, Grayson walked along a stone path, inspecting newly planted cactus blooms. His figure was steady, grounded, as though this place had become part of him. Camille drew a deep breath. She couldn't keep hiding. With Solis still asleep, now was her moment. She slipped on a light jacket and walked toward the main lodge. When Grayson saw her, he stopped, his expression flickering with uncertainty before he nodded in greeting. "How's Ridgefire coffee?" he asked, calm and roughened. "Stronger than I remember," Camille replied, steadying her tone. Silence stretched between them. Grayson rested his hands on his hips, then looked her straight in the eye. "I never thought I'd see you again. Here." Camille's lips curved into a half smile. "And I never thought you'd build an entire world in the middle of the desert." They sat at a wooden table beneath a Joshua tree. The wind carried scents of dry earth and wildflowers. Grayson laid his notebook aside, fingers threading together. "Camille, I owe you an apology. More than one, actually." She didn't flinch. "You left. Without a word. Just a note." His throat worked. "I was afraid. I thought all I could do was destroy. I wasn't ready to stay. And you thought I was ready?" Camille's voice cut sharply, though it trembled. "You didn't even give me the chance to find out." The desert wind gusted harder, pressing into the space between them. Grayson lowered his head. "There's no excuse. But I've changed. Ridgefire is proof I stayed. I stopped running. Camille opened her mouth, but footsteps interrupted. Small ones. Solus came bounding from the cabin, clutching his teddy bear. "Mama!" He stopped short when he saw Grayson. Their eyes met grey rimmed with gold, one pair innocent, the other lined with years. Time seemed to halt. "Hello there," Grayson said softly, his voice breaking. Solus tilted his head, glancing up at his mother. "Who is he, Mama?" Camille knelt, smoothing her son's hair. Her heart pounded. She had known this moment would come, but not this soon. "He's an old friend of mine." Grayson's hands tightened on the table. In his eyes raged a storm, confusion, regret, and the fragile flare of something he hadn't dared hope for. Solus smiled politely, in the way children copy from cartoons. "I'm Solus." The name struck Grayson like a blow. He repeated it under his breath, reverent, shaken. "Solus." Camille rose, taking her son's hand. "Let's get breakfast, sweetheart." As they walked away, Camille glanced back. Grayson's eyes were locked not on her but on the small figure at her side. It wasn't the gaze of a stranger. It was the gaze of a man realizing he had just met what he had missed most in all his life. Breakfast at Ridgefire's dining hall smelled of freshly roasted coffee and toasted bread. But to Camille, it was tasteless. Beside her, Solus sat happily, pancakes almost bigger than his small hands, his toy dinosaurs scattered across the table. Occasionally, he looked up with those storm-grey eyes rimmed in gold, grinning innocently at passing guests. Camille smiled with him, but inside, a storm churned. Her chest tightened each time Grayson passed their table directing staff, greeting visitors. She knew he had understood. He didn't need her to say it. The name Solus had spoken for her. That afternoon, Camille took her son for a walk around the retreat. Paths wound toward a small valley, desert wind carrying the dry scent of sage. Solus bounded ahead, his small shoes crunching on gravel. Camille followed with a quiet smile until she saw Grayson waiting at the end of the path. He didn't speak immediately. He only stepped beside them. Finally, his voice broke the silence. "How old is he?" Camille's throat tightened. 4. Grayson nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the boy. 4 years. He lifted his gaze, locking onto hers. "Camille, don't tell me this is just a coincidence." Her hand clenched. "Grayson, his eyes," he said, voice low and unsteady. "There's no mistaking them. He's mine, isn't he?" Camille's breath grew heavy. She had rehearsed for this moment for years, but now every word shattered in her mouth. "You chose to leave. I don't owe you an explanation." Grayson stopped, his stare burning into her. "Maybe you don't owe me, but he deserves the truth." Solus's cheerful shout broke the tension. "Mama, look, a lizard." Camille rushed to him, grateful for the distraction. But deep down, she knew Grayson was right. Solus had the right to know. That night, Camille sat on the cabin porch, watching her son sleep through the window. The desert lay silent under a sky spangled with stars. Footsteps approached. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. Grayson lowered himself beside her. For a long time, neither spoke. Then his voice, rough with regret. "Camille, walking away that morning was the greatest mistake of my life. I can't undo the years, but if there's any chance I want to be here, for you, for him." Camille turned, studying his face. Older, harsher, but his eyes unchanged except that they no longer looked like they were running. Her reply trembled. "I don't know if I can trust you again." He nodded, gaze steady. "Then let me prove it." The next day, Camille avoided him. She took Solus to the herb garden, where Ridgefire hosted a children's workshop. Kids sketched cactus blooms while Solus scribbled a sky of bright blue. Camille sat in the back row, forcing herself to focus on his laughter. But her heart stumbled every time Grayson's figure passed by the window. After Solus had drifted off to sleep that evening, a knock came at the cabin door. Camille opened it to find Grayson, expression taut. "We need to talk," he said, voice controlled but firm. She folded her arms, leaning against the frame. "You think talking now will change anything?" "At the very least," he answered, eyes unwavering. "I need the truth. Is he mine, Camille?" The words struck like a hammer. Camille inhaled sharply, fighting to steady herself. You made your choice. I raised him alone. I don't want anything from you, money, a name, or responsibility. Not for you, Grayson broke in, voice raw. For him. He deserves to know who his father is. Her nails bit into her palms. Do you know how many nights I rocked him to sleep alone? How many times have I rushed him to the ER with shaking hands? Where were you then, Grayson? Where was his father? Grayson stood frozen, every word slicing into him. His chest rose, his voice softened. I know I wasn't there. I regret it every day. But I'm here now. Please let me make it right. Tears welled in Camille's eyes. You can't just walk back in and say, I'm here. It's not that simple. He stepped closer, voice heavy but earnest. I don't want to take anything from you. I want to stand beside him so that when he falls off his bike, there's someone else there to catch him. So that when he asks why his eyes don't look like other kids, I can answer, Camille, give me the chance. Silence. Only the ragged sound of their breathing filled the air. Finally, Camille sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. Do you know what I fear most? Not for me, for Solis. I'm terrified you'll vanish again, and this time, he'll be the one left broken. Grayson lowered himself opposite her, his gaze unwavering. I don't run anymore. Ridgefire is proof of that. I've built every wall, planted every tree. I stayed, and if you let me, I'll stay for the two of you. Camille studied him, her heart torn between the memory of loss and the glimmer of change she saw in his eyes. A part of her wanted to believe. Another part still trembled. We need time, she whispered at last. Not for me, for Solis. Grayson nodded, shoulders loosening as though he had been holding his breath for years. Time is everything I'm ready to give. Inside the cabin, Solis stirred, murmuring in his sleep. A drowsy, innocent word slipped from his lips. Mama, Dada. The two adults sat silently, listening to the fragile prophecy of a child's dream, and for the first time, together, they dared to imagine the fragile possibility, however, uncertain that this family could be mended. In the days after their tense conversation, Camille began letting Grayson slip into the ordinary moments of life with Solis. At first, it was just small things, joining their morning walks, helping Solis build blanket forts in the living room, and reading a few pages of a children's book before bedtime. Solis, at 4, accepted the change without question. To him, it was simple joy, another grown-up to play with, someone who laughed at his wild stories and cheered for his silly jokes. But Camille couldn't be so naive. Each time she saw Grayson lifting Solis onto his shoulders, a storm surged inside her, warmth, regret, and fear all tangled together. One afternoon, the three of them sat on the grass at Ridgefire. Solis stacked rocks into a tower while Grayson steadied each piece with patient hands. When the tower tumbled, Solis collapsed into laughter, falling against his chest. Camille stood at a distance, her heart softening, aching. You're good with kids, she said quietly as she walked closer. Grayson gave a slight shrug, smiling. Really, I'm just following his lead. He's teaching me more than I'm teaching him. These were simple words, but they stayed with Camille long into the night. Later, when Solis was asleep, Camille worked on her laptop, jotting notes for a client. Her phone buzzed an email notification. She glanced absently, then froze at the subject line. Feature: The Return of Grayson Veil, Visionary or Vanished. It was from a major business magazine. The article praised Grayson's past empire, then dropped a rumor: the fallen mogul might be preparing a comeback. Camille's stomach tightened. She knew how hard he had tried to leave that world behind, but shadows of the past were stubborn. Worse still, the piece featured a recent photo of him at Ridgefire, speaking at a retreat. The next morning, she showed him her phone. Did you know about this? Grayson skimmed the article, his face hardening. I didn't tell them anything. Someone from the old circle must be stirring the pot. And what will you do? Camille pressed. His eyes lifted, steady. I chose this place. I'm not going back. But Camille's unease remained. Temptations don't always arrive as offers, they come as memories. And Grayson was still the man who had once left at sunrise, no matter how strong. That afternoon, the desert sky flared red with sunset. Camille brewed tea, watching Solis run in circles with the other children, his laughter carrying like music across the sand. Yet her thoughts clung to the article, heavy and restless. When Grayson stepped onto the porch, his expression was shadowed. "Someone came to see me," he said quietly. Her chest tightened. "Who?" "Lennox, my old partner." The name was familiar. Camille remembered the news stories Lennox had once stood beside Grayson on stage, before betrayal and collapse. "He wants a meeting tonight." "Says just 10 minutes, Grayson admitted. Camille set her teacup down, hands clenched. "And you're going?" He held her gaze, voice calm but firm. "I'm not hiding from you. But if I refuse, he won't stop." That night, Camille couldn't sleep. She spotted the faint glow of lights in the main lodge from her cabin window. Through the glass, she saw two figures, Lennox gesturing animatedly, Grayson listening silently, nodding at times. Her chest twisted, memories stabbed, the old Grayson intoxicated by power, leaving her with only a note. Fear whispered, was history repeating? When he finally returned, the hour was late. Camille sat waiting, her eyes sharp in the dark. "What will you tell me?" she asked, quiet but unyielding. Grayson dropped heavily into the chair, rubbing his forehead. "He offered me everything back, a board seat, shares, everything I once had." A bitter laugh slipped from her. "And you're tempted, aren't you?" His eyes flickered with torment. "A part of me, yes. Not for money or power, but because, if I went back differently, maybe I could prove I'm not the man who ran." "Prove to whom, Grayson? To them? Or to yourself?" Camille's voice shook with anger. "And what about Solis? He doesn't need a globe-trotting tycoon. He needs someone there when he wobbles on his first bike." The words cut deep. Grayson lowered his head, breath heavy. "Camille, I don't want to lose you, either of you." "You haven't lost us," she said, trembling. "You just have to decide if you'll stay." Silence pressed in, broken only by the desert wind through the cracks. Finally, Grayson rose. He crossed to the table where Lennox's folder lay. He stared at it momentarily, then tore every page to pieces in front of Camille, dropping them into the trash. "It's over," he said firmly. "I've made my choice." Camille studied him for a long time. Doubt still shadowed her, but for the first time, a glimmer of hope flickered too. In the next room, Solis stirred in his sleep, murmuring Dada, as if sensing a new chapter had quietly begun for his family. Mornings at Ridgefire were usually quiet, broken only by the rustle of desert wind through yucca trees and the footsteps of guests heading out to meditate. But in Camille's little cabin, mornings were anything but silent. Solis giggling as he tried to wriggle free from his mother's grasp, Camille hurriedly tugging a jacket onto him, and Grayson's groggy voice floating from the kitchen, "Pancakes or eggs?" Camille looked up, startled for a moment. Grayson, once the man who lived in glass penthouses, who had started his days with cold coffee and endless emails, stood there in an apron, holding a frying pan. "Solis, what do you want?" she asked. "Pancakes," the boy squealed. Grayson grinned. "I guessed as much." He flipped a lopsided but golden round onto a plate. Camille watched in silence. Part of her wanted to laugh at his clumsy effort. Another part felt something warm rising in her chest. That breakfast was far from perfect syrup spilled across the table. Solis dropped a plate to the floor, and Grayson spent more time cleaning than eating. But it was real. Real enough that Camille found herself easing, no longer wound as tightly as before. Later, they took Solis to the playground. Grayson pushed him on the swing, laughing at each squeal, answering every rapid-fire question. Camille sat on a bench, watching, and realized she hadn't seen her son this happy in a long time. "You're good at this," she said when Grayson came to sit beside her. He shrugged lightly. "I'm just relearning everything, like repeating first grade but with the best reward." His eyes lingered on Solis. "Every time he calls me Dada, I feel alive again." Camille turned away quickly, eyes damp. She didn't want him to see how deeply those words struck her. But Grayson didn't push. He sat beside her, silent, as though he knew this distance could only be closed by time, not force. In the days that followed, a new rhythm began to take shape. Grayson brought Camille coffee each morning, figured out how to replace batteries in Solis's toys, and read picture books at night. Camille kept her guard, but she began to let his hands share the weight she had carried alone for so long. One evening, Camille lingered in the doorway, listening as Grayson read The Fox and the Grapes. His exaggerated, silly fox voice had Solis rolling with laughter, gasping for breath. Something in Camille's chest tightened not with fear, but with the quiet recognition that this was what she had once dreamed of, then convinced herself she would never have. And now, it was here, in this cabin, in the desert. But desert nights weren't always calm. That night, Solis's coughing shattered the quiet. Camille bolted upright at the sound of his whimper, her hand pressing against his forehead, burning hot. "Grayson," she called, panic in her voice. He rushed in from the living room, eyes sharp in an instant. Solis was curled, flushed, and shivering. "Fever," he said grimly. Camille scrambled for medicine, for cool cloths. Grayson sat on the bed, gathering Solis against his chest. His voice was low, steady. "It's okay, buddy. Daddy's here." The simple words made Camille freeze. She had never heard anyone say that to her son. The night stretched, the two trading shifts, Camille checking temperatures, Grayson cooling Solis's skin, whispering stories until his eyes fluttered closed. At 3 a.m., Solis finally eased into steady breaths. Camille slumped into a chair, drained. Grayson touched her shoulder. "Get some rest. I'll keep watch. You're tired too." He shook his head softly. "I've stayed awake plenty of nights for things that meant nothing. This time, I have a reason." Camille looked at him, then really looked. The man before her wasn't the one who had once left at dawn. He was a father, learning how to stay. By morning, Solis was groggy but playful. "Dada, pancake," he mumbled. Grayson laughed, kissing his forehead. "Pancakes when you're better, champ." Camille stood by, tears stinging her eyes. Not from fear this time, but from relief. She whispered, "Thank you." Grayson turned, his gaze gentle. "No need to thank me. This is where I want to be." In the days that followed, he proved it again and again. Cooking porridge when Solis couldn't handle solids, offering to shop for groceries so Camille could rest, even tackling chores she never imagined he'd touch. One evening, Camille sat at her desk, papers stacked high, exhaustion etched across her face. Grayson appeared with 2 cups of tea. "Leave it for tomorrow," he urged. "I can't. Deadlines." He placed a hand on the pile, meeting her eyes. "You don't have to do it alone anymore. Let me help." She froze, not at the offer, but at the quiet sincerity in his gaze. For years, she had conditioned herself never to expect help and to carry everything herself. Yet here he was, not just promising, but truly willing. Slowly, she nodded, letting him sit beside her. Together they combed through documents, debated, even argued lightly until their laughter broke the tension. When they finished, Camille leaned her head against his shoulder. "I forgot what this feels like." "What does?" "Having someone here, really here." Grayson's hand closed gently around hers. "You won't forget again." Outside, the desert stretched silent beneath a sky full of stars. But inside the little cabin, Camille no longer felt alone for the first time in years. Time in the desert moved with a slower rhythm. Each morning, sunlight gilded the faraway mountains, spilling through the cabin windows where 3 lives had begun to find a shared pace. One weekend, Camille and Grayson took Solis to the farmer's market in a nearby town. Wooden stalls overflowed with oranges, jars of honey, and fresh vegetables. Solis toddled ahead, clutching an apple nearly the size of his face, chomping happily. "Mama, should I get one for Dada too?" he asked, holding up a second apple, eyes sparkling. Camille froze. She had never taught him that word. It had simply come natural, inevitable, as though he had already formed his own definition. Grayson smiled, ruffling his son's hair. "Thanks, buddy. Dada loves apples." Camille pressed her lips together, neither correcting nor acknowledging it. But inside, another line in her heart began to blur. That afternoon, they returned with bags of produce and bread. Grayson insisted on cooking. Camille sat at the table, watching him fumble with a knife. Nearly dropping it, she burst out laughing. "And you used to manage 100 employees," she teased. "Yeah," he said without looking up, "but I never once managed to control a kitchen knife." Their laughter spilled into the room, catching Solis at the corner of the table, who laughed too, without knowing why. Dinner was nothing fancy, vegetable soup and toasted bread, but Camille realized it had been years since she'd sat at a table filled with so much laughter. After Solis fell asleep that night, Grayson sat on the porch while the desert wind moved softly around them. Camille brought out 2 cups of tea. They sat side by side in silence, watching the stars. "Do you ever get scared?" she asked quietly. "Scared of what?" "Of messing up again, of leaving." Grayson turned, his eyes steady, tender. "Every day. But fear doesn't mean I'll run. It just reminds me I need to stay." Her pulse quickened. His words felt like a tether pulling her closer, though they left her trembling too. They didn't kiss that night. No one broke the silence. But the distance between them, physical and otherwise, was thinning, like the horizon dissolving into the sky. A few days later, an email arrived. A prominent Los Angeles media firm invited Camille to lead a project she had once dreamed of. The contract was dazzling, but came with one condition. She had to be in the city office at least 4 days a week. Camille sat frozen, torn between excitement and dread. Solis played with toy dinosaurs on the rug, while Grayson made coffee in the kitchen. She bit her lip. "What's wrong?" he asked, setting a mug by her. She hesitated, then showed him the screen. Grayson skimmed the offer, his face thoughtful. "This is big." "Yes, but I'll be gone most of the week if I take it." Solis. He needs stability. Grayson studied her for a long moment. "If you want it, take it. I'll be here with him." She blinked. "You say that like it's easy. Raising a kid isn't." "I know," he said gently. "But I want to try. Not instead of you, with you." Her heart stilled. She wanted to believe, but part of her walls still stood. The next day, life tested his promise. Camille was on a call with a potential client when Solis tripped outside, scraping his knee. His cries pierced through the window. Camille panicked, ready to run, but Grayson was already there. He scooped Solis into his arms, murmuring steady comfort, cleaning the wound, bandaging with careful hands. Solis hiccuped, still teary, until Grayson whispered, "Dada's got you." The boy clung to his neck, quieting. Camille stood in the doorway, unable to move. The scene both calmed and pierced her because no one else had ever done that for Solis but her. That night, she found Grayson on the porch. "You did well today," she said softly. He gave a wistful smile. "I just wish I could have done it from the day he was born." She sat beside him in silence, then sighed. "I'm scared, Grayson. I'm scared that if I let you in, you'll walk out again one day. Not just from me this time, from him." He turned, gaze unwavering. "I can't promise perfection, but I can promise one thing. I'll stay. Whether you believe it now or not, I'll prove it one day at a time." Her walls trembled, not collapsing but cracking. She didn't answer. Instead, she handed him a cup of tea, and for the first time, they didn't sit apart, but wrapped together under a single blanket beneath the desert stars, sharing warmth in the silence. The weeks that followed brought a new rhythm. Camille accepted the big project in Los Angeles, a chance she never thought she'd have again. Her heart beat with both excitement and fear. She drove across the desert highway back into the city every Monday morning. Grayson stood on the porch with Solis in his arms, waving. Solis shouted after her, "Bye, Mama. Dada and I will wait." Those words soothed her, yet unsettled her too. For years, everything had rested on her shoulders. Now she had to learn what sharing the weight with him meant. While she was gone, Grayson took over. He packed Solis's lunches, learned to tie tiny shoelaces, and even attended parent-teacher meetings. At first, teachers looked surprised, but soon they began to say, "Solis lights up when his dad picks him up." When Grayson repeated those words to her, Camille's chest constricted. Pride and joy mingled with a sharp sting of jealousy. For so long, that role had been hers alone. Now, She had to learn to let it expand. One Friday evening, Camille returned from a long week to find Grayson and Solis sprawled on the living room floor, inside a fortress of pillows and blankets. Laughter rang through the cabin. "We built a whole castle," Grayson said proudly. Camille smiled, but there was an ache in it. She felt she had walked in on a chapter of her family story that had gone on without her. That night, after Solis was asleep, she joined Grayson on the porch. Desert wind, sharp and cool. "You're doing well," she murmured. "I'm just learning," he replied. Silence stretched between them. Then she exhaled. "Sometimes I'm scared I'm no longer the center of Solis's world." Grayson's gaze softened. "You still are. But now he has another circle to stand in. Not to replace you, never that. To stand with you." The words soothed and pierced at once. They named her deepest fear, losing the only role she had ever been certain of. In the days that followed, they found a tentative balance, but fractures showed. Camille's emails dragged her away from dinners. Meetings kept her late, and a shadow crossed his face each time Grayson's name resurfaced in a business article. They were closer than ever, yet fragile lines crept in hairline cracks in glass. The storm didn't rise from the desert. It came from Los Angeles. One Monday, Camille entered the office to find a buzz in the air. Phones rang, whispers rippled. She opened her laptop and froze at the headline flashing across the business news. "Grayson Veil. From disgraced mogul to single father. What's the truth?" The article paired an old narrative with new bait. A photograph of Grayson carrying Solis at the farmer's market. Warm and intimate, twisted into scandal. The writer dredged up his past collapse, painting it as abandonment, now spiced with insinuations about an unexpected child. Heat flushed Camille's face, not just because of the lies, but because Solis's name had been dragged in. Her phone buzzed. A text from an old colleague. "Camille, is that really his kid? Be careful, don't get used." The words made her dizzy. At that moment, her phone rang. "Grayson, you've seen it." His voice was taut. "Yes," she said, trembling with anger. "They had no right to drag my son into this." "Our son," he corrected softly. "I'm sorry. I should have seen it coming." "Did you?" she demanded. "Who gave them that photo?" "Not me." His reply was firm. "But it could be Lennox. He wants to prove I can't escape the spotlight." Camille's chest knotted. Memories of the man he once was came flooding back. Ambition, collapse, the morning he disappeared. A part of her wanted to believe this time was different. Another part quaked. Would she and Solis be the price again, if the world pulled him back? That evening, she drove back to Ridgefire. Light spilled from the cabin. Inside, Grayson sat at the kitchen table, stacks of press clippings before him. He looked up as she entered. "I'll hold a press conference," he said at once. "End the rumors." Her brow furrowed. "A press conference? You'd drag Solis into that?" "No, never. But I need to be clear. I didn't leave the company because I was running. I left because survival demanded it. And about Solis, I want the world to know the truth. He's mine, and I choose to be here." Camille's fists tightened. "Are you sure? Once you say it, our quiet life is over." "I know," he said, his voice hard but steady, "but I won't let my son grow up in shadows. I ran once. This time, I'll stand." Tears pricked Camille's eyes. "If you leave again, Grayson, if you break this after all of it, there won't be a second chance." He rose, stepped close, and clasped her hand. "I'm not leaving. Not you. Not him. If I have to face the whole world to prove it, I will. Because this time, Camille, I've chosen to stay." And in that moment, Camille knew. This wasn't just a trial for him. It was the final trial of her own heart, whether she dared to believe again. The press conference took place in a modest Los Angeles hotel. Not the grand stages Grayson had once commanded, but a small room crowded with reporters, flashes bursting like restless stars. Camille sat in the back row, clutching a handkerchief. She had always avoided the media's glare, but this time she needed to see it with her own eyes. Grayson walked out. No tailored suit, no polished tie, just a plain white shirt. He stood at the podium, silent for a beat, then lifted his gaze to meet the cameras. "My name is Grayson Veil," he began, voice steady. Most of you know me from the company I once built and the downfall that followed. Today, I'm not here to reclaim a reputation. I'm here to tell the truth. He paused, drew in a breath. I didn't leave because of fear. I left because I was dying inside a life of lies. I let ambition consume me, and in doing so, I hurt the people I loved most. That was the greatest mistake of my life. Pens scratched furiously across notepads. Cameras pushed closer. But I'm not here to excuse myself. I'm here because of one reason. A boy named Solis. My son. He is not a rumor, not a secret, not a tool to rebuild my legacy. He is a gift I will never take for granted, and I will never walk away from him. A ripple of voices surged through the room. A reporter rose. Mr. Veil, do you plan to return to the business world? Grayson's answer was clear, unwavering. No, that life is behind me. My family is my only future. I choose to stay. I choose to be a father. That is the truth. Camille's throat closed. She had waited years for these words, not flowery promises, but a final choice. When the press conference ended, Grayson walked past the swarm of questions, his face unshaken. He went straight toward Camille at the back. Across the room, his eyes found hers. A small nod. I did it for us. Her fingers clenched around the handkerchief, tears slipping down her cheek, not from fear this time, but from release. On the drive back to Ridgefire, the desert night stretched quietly and endlessly. Camille sat in the passenger seat, Solis asleep in the back, clutching his toy bear. The hum of the road, the rhythm of the boy's breathing, wrapped them in calm. She turned to look at Grayson. This was not the man who had once left at dawn, leaving only an empty note. This was someone older, worn with lines of worry, hands roughened by work, eyes steadier than she had ever seen. You did what I thought you never could, she whispered. He answered without looking away from the road. I thought so too, but I realized running is easy. Staying, that's the only fight worth it. And I'm done running. Camille lowered her gaze, then spoke softly. I wrote you a letter. Never gave it to you. Maybe now you should read it. Back at the cabin, she pulled a blue envelope from a drawer and placed it in his hands. Grayson opened it, his eyes tracing the trembling but honest words. I don't need someone who promises forever. I need someone here today, tomorrow, and the day after. If you can do that, I will ask for nothing more. When he finished, his eyes shone. I won't leave. Not for you, not for him, because I need this too. A family. Camille's heart wavered, then yielded. The walls she had built for so long finally crumbled. The next morning, they hiked a small mountain nearby. Grayson carried Solis on his shoulders, and Camille with a picnic packed beside them. On the summit, wind whipped through their hair, the valley stretching infinitely below. We're superheroes, Solis shouted from above, arms spread wide. Camille laughed. Grayson looked up at his son, then at her. He reached for her hand, no words, just the quiet certainty of fingers entwined. And Camille knew this was the answer. Not a diamond ring, not an audience, not a vow recited beneath arches, just a man, a woman, and a child, choosing each other at the world's edge. That evening, when Solis was tucked into bed, Grayson brought out a small wooden box. Not a ring box, but a photo frame. Inside was a picture of the three caught mid-laughter at the farmer's market. I want this to be my promise, he said. Not for a morning, not for a year, for a lifetime. Camille touched the frame, then her chest, where the last barricade had fallen. Then let's keep it. Together. Grayson drew her into his arms. No vows, just shared breath, steady and real. The next morning, sunlight painted the desert gold. Camille brewed coffee, Grayson fried eggs, and Solis darted around the cabin with his squeaky shoes. It was an ordinary morning, and that was the miracle. Camille lifted her gaze to the two people who were her life now. She smiled. For the first time in years, she didn't wonder, will he stay? She thought only, we are here, and we will keep going. And that was the final choice.